All right, well, we're almost at the top of the hour. I see attendees rolling on in. I'm going to go ahead and get set up on the hub here. Hopefully you all can see that okay.
As we move forward together.
For now, right before we get things kicked off, if you don't mind keeping your microphone on mute until we're ready for the Q&A. All right. Well, we're right at the top of the hour, so why don't we go ahead and get things kicked off here. Julietta, you're good to just keep admitting anybody that's signing in?
Yes, no problem, Nigel.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. I've been really looking forward to this event because I think it's kind of a fun one, and it's a bit of a different topic than we often present about. So, you know, honestly, I feel like it is the modern workplace is what's kept Microserve operational since we started sending a lot of our teams home at the start of March. So really our goal today is to share with you all a bit about our journey to the modern workplace, what this did for us, you know, and essentially give you a taste of how we leverage tools like Teams and Surface, and as you can see behind me here, the Surface Hub, to keep our staff connected and engaged throughout. Just a quick check, everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
So to kick things off, just quick introductions. My name's Nigel Brown. I'm Microserve's VP of Professional and Managed Services for Microserve. I also have responsibility for our internal systems as well. And I've got Ash on the line, who's our training specialist and instructional designer. And she's part of our investment in sort of the change management and adoption component of all things modern workplace for us internal and for our clients. On the Microsoft front, we've got Shelly, Greg, Praveen, and Martin, all here to support your questions that might come up or anything that you might happen to stump me with. Now, Shelly, do you want to say a quick hello?
Perfect. Thanks, Nigel. Hi, everyone. I do appreciate everyone taking the time today to join us. Really excited about the opportunity for you to hear Microserve's journey and how they were so successfully able to migrate some of the COVID situations that I'm sure we all experienced. So looking forward to that. And again, if there is any questions, the rest of the Microsoft team is here as well. So please let us know how we can help.
You bet. Thanks, Shelly. And with that, feel free if you want to put your questions into the chat. I'll admit I won't be watching it yet, but as we go throughout, I'm sure the Microsoft team can do some quick responses, and then as we get to the end of the presentation, we'll leave a good chunk of time for any questions and answers that might come up. So without further ado, you know, the quick agenda is really walking you through our world, the journey it took to get us there, a little bit about the results that we've achieved with that, and then actually give you a demo in the context of the education environment, what that means. And obviously, where can we help your organizations get you through some of this as well, should you be desiring that path. So jumping right into Microserve's internal needs, you know, realistically, our needs probably don't look any different than many of your organizations. You know, the core functions around communications and collaboration, obviously we need email and calendaring, things like instant messaging, the ability to host online events like we're doing today, not even events, but just regular old meetings, standard voice calling and telephony. And what's probably more specific to us as a service provider is that we also have a need for a highly available contact center for teams like our help desk and our dispatch teams, for example. Now, lastly, to tie all this together, I definitely have to believe part of our requirement is that at the end of the day, we need devices that just work for this kind of collaborative environment. So, we really can't afford to be spending so much of the time like we normally do troubleshooting drivers in our imaging process, or figuring out how the heck we're now making sure that all these machines are secure no matter where they are. So, a little bit, not all that long ago, really we had no centralized hub for information at Microserve. So our officially supported platforms were things like we had an on-premise SharePoint environment that was aging and due for refresh. And the reality was many teams still had at least portions of their work stored on our good old-fashioned file servers on-premise here at Microserve. In addition to that, we also had tool sprawl, like many organizations. Whether it's the exec team going out and buying their own subscriptions to Dropbox so that they can better share files with coworkers, clients, or partners, for example, or maybe in some cases the use of Google Docs popping up because that's what the tool our client was using. So all of this really made a struggle, in our day-to-day lives of how we just stay productive. If we think about our experience around version control and teamwork and co-authoring, I hate to say it, but realistically, we did the good old, change the file name and append v1 and v, and so on to the file names. More than that, what that also meant is what we were doing more often than not when collaborating and working files together, they're sent over email back and forth. The best example I have that from an impact perspective at Microserve was many occasions watching, a big portion of our life is responding to requests for proposals and putting major bids together. So you can imagine watching our bid team amalgamating 20 documents that came in over the inbox and having to put those all together at the 11th hour to submit our response on time. So of course, all of this is the stuff that impacts our ability to be productive and focus on what's most important, which is essentially all of you, our clients. Now, I started presenting this slide pre-COVID, so all the stats you're seeing here are all before that. I think all of us could probably agree that we've blown all of the stats completely out of the water. A third of the meetings, no. I mean, basically, they're all virtual now. I've only seen once in 4 months that there's been one in-person meeting where people are at the opposite ends of the table, and I could only watch one of them on the camera, so it really didn't work all that well. More than that, I think as we go back to the office, many of you may have already started. At Microserve, we've still been keeping a cautious approach and only keeping our essential workers in our offices. And to keep them protected, many of us have still been working from home. But as we do think about going back, I think the workplace as we know it has ultimately changed as well. Many of the spaces, including our head office that I'm sitting here all by myself today in, have a really open and flexible floor plan. And this was designed to promote and foster communication and collaboration with colleagues. Now, as people come back, now we need to be 6 feet apart. We need to put barriers up between each other to keep us safe. So I really don't think even when we go back to work, it's going to be the same as it was before. Now, an interesting report from Microsoft that really stood out was that on average, meeting attendees have at least 10 meetings a week. Out of all those meetings, roughly 60% of them are unsatisfied with their current meetings or found them unproductive or struggled to deal with. More than that, in our case, a few years ago, we were living in a world where we had WebEx, GoToMeeting, Skype for Business, Teams was being introduced, and it was even being pushed to add on Zoom as well. So that really left us in an interesting collab communications experience. Really challenging to support first off, but more importantly, kind of left our staff to figuring out that landscape, and none of them really got to become a master at any one tool so that they're fully productive. And then all of the stresses that come with that of not being able to join the meeting on time, trying to figure out how do you share in this tool versus the other tool, all that stuff really becomes a challenge. Now, I'm a big believer in time management concepts and the value of finding ways to be more productive. We spend so much of our time doing things that are pretty routine and have opportunities for automation in many of those tasks. More than that, when you're working on all of those tasks, the number of times that we have to switch gears, whether it be an interruption from a walk by, a colleague or a phone ringing, or even just as simple as bouncing back and forth between applications when you're trying to get your job done. You know, essentially, those are all things that kind of hold us back from being more productive in the workplace. Now, I know this saying is already getting overused, but we really are living in what's a new normal. This means that as IT, we need to adapt. And you know, whether it's related to figuring out how we deploy equipment successfully in home office environments, or just making sure how do we keep it managed and secured when it's at home and no longer in an office that we have more control over. In that, it's the same breath, Microsoft has a concept called zero trust. Now, this could be a whole webinar topic unto itself, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it. But you know, simply put, often we assume that as long as the device is managed or it's behind a corporate firewall, that it must be safe. I'd like all of you to think about that and try and challenge that dialogue, because you know, when you boil it down, what we're trying to protect is our corporate data. And there's three major components that help ensure that we've got security. The first is the identity. You know, do we trust the user that signs in, and are who you say you are? Are we sure that the device is protected and meets our compliance needs, which is why we do things like imaging and all of the policies that we apply to a machine to make sure we can trust it? And then lastly, where are they accessing that data from? So with that, I'm just going to grab a sip of water before I keep going. So diving into our journey into this suite, you know, really just like many organizations, we sold the idea to the executives at Microserve largely around the premise of moving to Exchange Online and getting rid of our, you know, expensive, high performance, tons of data storage on-premise Exchange environment. I see this all the time with our clients. That's always the easiest path to get into the O365 cloud and start thinking about other things. But you know, we then realized that obviously we got this legacy SharePoint environment. We need to get rid of it. We're already paying a license that includes SharePoint Online. Why wouldn't we consume it? So we then embarked on our SharePoint Online project. We transitioned all of our content from our legacy SharePoint environment. And then much of our file system content that was active being used also went to SharePoint Online. You know, already at that point, almost overnight, the co-authoring of document experience completely transformed at Microserve. You know, things like thinking of again, using that proposal bid scenario where 11th hour, night before a massive bid is due, no longer was it, you know, dozens of emails that were amalgamating together into one response document and all that midnight stress. But it was the first time I highlighted my moment where I actually had to screenshot my computer when I saw more than 10 of our colleagues on at like 11 o'clock at night, all editing the same file. And then more importantly, while they were doing it, I even knew where their cursor was and I could watch them type in real time. So that's where I started kind of getting excited. You know, we had SharePoint before on-premise, didn't do any of that kind of stuff for us, right? So it just wasn't there. It wasn't as seamless and giving that modern experience of collaboration. So somewhere right around that 2018-19 mark, we had sort of a major wake-up call. So our telephony environment, which was voice over IP, but it was pushing probably a good decade old, had an outage. We weren't sure it was going to come back online. So for us, that triggered, you know, essentially going through the same process that many of you would do through a procurement process. We went to bid. Now, as we did that experience and we did all the requirements gathering, put together bid document out, sent it out onto the street, you know, I'll be honest that what came back, I was a little disappointed to see the solutions. We purposely used the word unified communications and not just telephony. However, many of the solutions that came back were 90% telephony focused, with sort of thinking about things like web conferencing and some of the other collaboration almost as a bolt-on. You know, we gave the telephony solution. Oh yeah, you want to do meetings? Well, you can go and buy an O365 license for that. So in the end, luckily, one of the latecomers to the bid process was built on a Teams telephony platform. And I'm really happy to say in the end, we managed to present that business case to Spud. And convince them that moving to Teams for voice was really so then we embarked on our Teams journey. Now for us, that started with moving from a Skype on-prem environment to Skype Online, followed immediately by a migration into Teams Online. And we did that between August and September of last year. Then this year, we headed into Teams calling. You know, the winter period was a lot of the solution development work, things like that, understanding contract negotiations with a new telecom provider that could integrate with the solution. And I'm happy to say, thank goodness we did get that far as we moved forward. Now, really no matter how you spin it though, what we really found is that the M365 suite overall meets our diverse needs as an integrated solution that's built from the ground up with security in mind. You know, what I really love is the fact that this is ultimately a single platform with one set of tools to manage all of security compliance, and then even the modern devices as a part of this vision. Now, if there's anything that we've really uncovered as we transition to sort of the modern management world, which is sort of a subset to me of the modern workplace, it's essentially how simple security can be when it's integrated all the way to hardware. As Microsoft coins the phrase from cloud to chip, you know, that's the sort of context there. And specifically what I'm referring to, you know, starting if I take autopilot on a Surface device, for example, this means that I can stop having our support teams coming to the office just to image a machine to ship it off to a new user. So it usually comes from a warehouse to our tech center to do imaging work, and then out the door to that end user. We can cut out a bunch of those steps in many of those cases thanks to autopilot and completely redoing how we're doing imaging. And then more than that, tying into things like being able to completely manage the UEFI bias no matter where that machine happens to live. So I can get down into policy whether certain individuals aren't allowed to use the camera on the device or whatever the settings might be, and we can enforce that, ensure that as machines connect, that those policy settings are being applied at a bias level. And I'm doing that all under one tool premise. Not to say this can't be done elsewhere, but what I found is, you know, in light of, you know, many firmware attacks being found or vulnerabilities being found at a firmware level, some of these client organizations that are dealing with multi-vendor environments are looking at having to deploy individual firmware management and updating tools that are very built around that on-premise centric environment and aren't up to speed with sort of that modern management approach to secure it. So I'm going to jump over into what did this really do for us? And, you know, starting with the Teams concept, you know, my favorite way to think about Teams is that it effectively pulls together all of the goodness of the tools under O365 into a single hub for teamwork that enables us to effectively communicate and collaborate together. Really what this means is finally getting work out of our Outlook inboxes and into a more modern platform that allows us to manage that incoming workload and split it up between the teams and the channels, knowing which ones you got to focus on first, as opposed to a sea of 300 messages today sitting in your inbox that you've got to manually sort and figure out what to do with, for example. Now, where this gets even better, as we've certainly recently found out, that being 100% cloud-based all the way into Teams calling, it really doesn't matter where we are at Microserve anymore. We can collaborate with our team, we could be placing phone calls to our clients from our office numbers, or facilitating effective meetings like we are today, all with never leaving the Teams app. So, you know, right away you start seeing, you know, the task switching, that mental loss of productivity from bouncing between tools starts coming under one premise. Now, I will be honest though that Microserve historically has very much been an in-person office culture. Now, essentially, we've always had a strong belief that that's how we connect with our coworkers, and that's how we create that sense of community as a business and how we want to work with our clients and what our work style is like. Now, overnight though, I can say without a doubt that Teams is really what kept our culture intact as we basically overnight became digital. we had no choice, and it forced our hand to think differently than we almost always have. Now, a good example of that for me personally is I'm still pretty technical myself and run a lot of the technical aspects in teams at Microserve. And as you can imagine, a big component of that job is collaborating effectively, thinking about good ideas, solution design on a whiteboard, for example. Now, one of my biggest holdbacks to remote workforce and collaborating remotely has always been that I couldn't find a way to replace that feel of, we're all huddled doing a whiteboard in an office area, up on the wall drawing a network diagram or whatever the case may be, and then scratching it out and drawing something else again, and that sort of collaborative feel of things that don't waste our time. We're not going to Visio yet and hard locking everything in place. It's just that dynamic nature of being able to talk together, right? And what's interesting on the flip side, though, I've been a OneNote and Microsoft and a pen user on a Windows device for nearly 15 years. So I go back, I think my left bicep is still bigger than my right from carrying around the giant tablet that I used to have so I could use a pen in meetings. But I never found a way to share that with coworkers and collaborate that way. So, thanks to the solutions that we now have through this, I'm happy to say that we can actually do that again. And the coolest part to me is from anywhere we are. We're not tied to the office. For those that are, or thanks to this webinar that got me into the office to get to play with the hub, that's great. But anybody that's carrying a Surface device or a pen-enabled device, even if you're not, you can still see a whiteboard and collaborate effectively together. So that's, the first sign where I really started seeing that, for once, technology isn't inhibiting our ability to effectively collaborate, for example. So as this relates to the pandemic, I'm never going to forget, Sunday morning getting an email from Spud that said, hypothetically, can we get 30 of our staff working from home? Obviously my response went into more detail and I explained what we could and couldn't do, things like that. But ironically, within 10 days, we were able to send 150 staff home. So we blew away that expectation of, what are we going to do? How are we managing our workforce? Very quickly, we got it down to the essential staff that we needed to keep our operations going only, and to keep them safe, sending everybody else home and away from the office as best we could. So a little bit of this, I'm not going to talk through the detail of it, but we essentially ramped up our priority around the Teams voice cutover process. And I'm really happy to say that essentially by April 30th, we were 100% into Teams calling. So now we're really shifting our focus, May and beyond right now, we've now implemented Azure Identity Protection, for example. We're looking at taking autopilot and transitioning 100%. So we're actually moving from our past 2 years or so of SCCM code management with Intune. We'll actually be breaking that connection, decommissioning SCCM and going 100% native under the Intune premise. And like I said earlier, enabling that ability to leverage autopilot to its fullest extent, which right now, as it relates to the pandemic, that's one of the best things that we can do is keep our new staff that we bring on productive on day one. So I had to put in a couple quotes in here that I love to hear. Now the first one, so Mike Rizzo, he's our VP Finance. He'll be the only other guy at the far end of our office today. He's been holding down the fort here in our head office in Burnaby. And of course he asked me, so what are you doing here? Just the other week. I said, well, I'm prepping for a webinar. And we got talking, and I mentioned it's about Teams and the modern workplace and all this collab that we've been doing. And he was so excited. He had to tell me that last week, for the very first time, he figured out how to share his screen on Teams and work on a spreadsheet with Spud, our president, in real time. And he was so excited because it's so easy. So I did get his approval to put that quote there, and it was just really cool to start seeing that. And I've heard that conversation so many times in our organization. I just had a conversation with a technician I haven't seen in 4 months who was in here doing some work for us. And he said, yeah, I mean, these offices are empty. I was really feeling lonely as one of the only on-site guys, and it's really, really empty. And then I opened Teams for the very first time. I'm like, oh my God, everybody's in it. And I was getting instant responses and quick dialogue, and I could see chats taking place. So that experience is really what kept our sense of having an office presence without a physical office. Now, often when we talk about deploying new technology, in our heads, we all, as IT folk anyways, we often jump straight to that thought of, okay, support requests are going to go through the roof as we deploy it. Am I going to have to make a hire to support the new technology stack? On and on and on, right? I think what I'd really highlight here, and sort of the intent of the slide, is thinking about the fewer moving parts that we have in the collaboration platform, the simpler the support model becomes. And I really can't stress this value enough, that what we've already been watching is that somehow we're communicating more effectively and collaborating more than we ever have before digitally, yet we're actually making it simpler and secure and easier to manage. So don't just take my word for it. I had to throw in a slide here from some Forrester total economic impact studies that were done all around these topics. I'd be more than willing to share any of these along with you after the event. But it really backs some of the data points here. And I can tell for one, within Microserve, with roughly 300 employee base, many of these stats are holding true. I just haven't done the formal math like they did. So as we start thinking about Surface and how it ties into Teams, if I back it up to, honestly, I can't remember when the very first Surface device came out. Those early years, I remember almost being a bit of a skeptic or an naysayer around it, going, my worries jump straight to what everybody does. Oh man, we got another vendor to think about supporting, drivers to introduce, figuring out how the hardware works and how to create an image for it. All that stuff that came with it just kind of made me shudder a little bit of, we got another major manufacturer coming. But then, obviously, I watched the adoption starting in many of our client bases and started thinking a little bit differently about it. And then, literally almost a year ago to this day, right before I went on holidays to Europe, I got this device, my first Surface Go. So it was my very first Surface, and took it on vacation with me. First time I've never brought, my big laptop with me as a just in case when I'm in, on vacation. I just brought the Surface Go, and what I really found out, while I thought that was going to be my work device and maybe the device I use when I'm looking up what restaurants to go out to or things like that, that really quickly it also became my home entertainment device. For the first time in more than a decade, I actually haven't used my iPad in almost a year. That was that religious device that I always came to when I just needed the break and was turning on Netflix. What I figured out is that the Go actually had way better sound quality. So, things like that were just these little details, and it's lighter. And in that context, using the kickstand was amazing. So, it kind of got my taste of what this could be all about. Now, when I talk about, using devices, for many years as a pretty diehard kind of technology guy, my primary machine's almost always been a pretty big, beefy performance laptop. This usually meant that my carry bag for it came on wheels, and part of my tool chest was the good old speaker puck to plug in, external mic and whatnot, just because the quality was always better, and I often found that the built-in speaker or microphones caused problems where people couldn't hear me well enough. So I got the Surface Pro 7 and made that switch, ironically, in February, not knowing what was about to come. Sort of redid my home office. And I can honestly say that in those last 4 months, I haven't felt the need once to ever plug in an external speaker puck or an external camera, because what's built in is just working. And when you think of the context of work from home, it really makes such a difference. I often find now that while our kids are in and out of Zoom meetings and maybe they decide to come and play in my office while I'm in the middle of a conference call, well, I'll just pick up that device, start walking with it and talking and switch rooms. Or maybe I go to the backyard to enjoy a little bit of sun while I'm on that meeting, right? So I found just picking up the device to be able to walk with it, and I was tethered to my desk before and I didn't even know it. So I think getting into that experience and really seeing for it has really helped change my view of what this is all about and the differences that it brings. Now, I did mention earlier that I've been a diehard OneNote and pen user for a really, really long time. Out of that, the Surface is actually the only device that's actually almost recreated that physical likeness of pen on paper. And holding the device in a vertical layout feels like a page. Writing on it feels easy. And all I do is tear off the keyboard and start writing on it, or editing a Word document and marking it up with handwriting. So, things like that, I've been blown away by that experience. And, and the potential around productivity that brings. So with that, the idea is we're going to jump into a bit of a hands-on demo. And specifically in the context of education, what Teams looks like and how we can use it. So Ash is going to help me out with this one. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pretend we have a demo tenant stood up in O365. I'm going to pretend to be Kara, who's the teacher in this scenario, and Ash is going to be Adele, and she's a student. So what I'm going to show you is essentially coming into the tool as a teacher, going, I have an assignment that I need to hand out to my students today, and it's due tomorrow, so I got to get this done fast. And then Adele is going to have a look at that assignment as it pops up, realize that she's not sure about something, needs some help from me, and is going to start that dialogue with me, and I'm going to give her help on the whiteboard. The one thing I'll say is given that we're already in a webinar and an event here, the only caveat I'm going to be is normally when I'd say I'd actually connect and meet now with her over the hub if I had one, or on my Surface Pro. However, given that meeting setup, I'm going to just jump into Whiteboard and show you direct without the video experience on that component. So, switch machines here. Okay, so I've just logged into the Office 365 portal as the teacher. You can see up here that my name is now Kara. And I'm going to jump straight into Teams for this one. So right away you see I come into Teams. What it's showing me is essentially all of the teams that I'm a member of within the system. So you can see I've got some classes. I run an algebra class, physical science class, entrepreneurship course. But more than that, I've got some staff groups as well. So I'm a part of the school staff for Pineview, which is the school I'm in. And I'm a science teacher, so we have a team around all of the science teachers at our school. In this case, I'm going to jump right into the physical science class. Now, Ash will show you a little bit more of the student experience, but we essentially have a very similar one. All of our chat history and collab and having conversations related to my science class is all self-contained into here. And the one thing I want to highlight is I'm not sure I would have seen as much value before as I did when my kids started working from home. Now they're only 6 and 4, but with our school, we've got a combination of tools they asked us to use really quickly. Nobody had ever used them pre-March, and they did respond quite quickly, I'll give them that. But we're required to set up a Gmail account, have an inbox running. A part of that was a Google Classroom. Some of the work was getting assigned via email. Some of it was getting assigned via Google Classroom. And then they ran Zoom for all of their meetings. So, I personally really struggled getting my kids set up in that 10 minutes before I started my workday, trying to get them into their Zoom class session, what assignments were due, making sure they were on track. I was really flipping between a whole number of tools. So here, seeing that experience is what started changing my mind and relating this how Teams could help in education context. So in my case, as I mentioned, I'm going to jump straight to assignments. I've got a new assignment I need to give. And in here, you can already see all these pre-scheduled assignments that are set to launch on certain dates and get assigned to class at the right time. Now in this case, I'm going to go super easy. I'm going to create a brand new assignment. We're going to call it Newton's Laws of Physics paper. As far as instruction goes, do your research, put together a report on your findings. Keep it nice and easy so I don't waste your time typing. Now, as Ash explained to me with more of the training background, I didn't know what a rubric was until the first time I tried to demo this, and she explained to me the concept of, this is like your grading system. So we created a mock-up one. Again, you can create your own or upload rubrics if you already have them. But in this case, essentially, super, super simple. You know, the criteria that we decided, honestly, after a quick Google, was neatness, completion, timeliness, and accuracy. And they're all evenly weighted, and you can see how I can score them. So my assignment's ready to go. You can see date due is tomorrow. So I'm maybe not being a kind teacher, giving them 24 hours to turn this around, but it's just a demo. Then I'm going to go ahead and assign it. So at this point, that new report is logged, and let me turn it over to Ash to intro the student experience.
Thank you, Nigel. So here I'll go ahead and show you how it's going to look on the student end. So here it is. So as Kara has assigned me the assignment, so I can see there are two classes of physical science and algebra, but I've got an assignment on the physical science session. So as you can see, there's an assignment. So let me go ahead and have a look at it. Oh, yeah. So it's an assignment on Newton's laws of physics paper. And here are the instructions, and it's due tomorrow. But before I go ahead and do the assignment, I do have some questions that I need to ask Kara about it. So I can do it right over here. So let me just include her. And can you explain first law in detail? So let's wait for Kara to answer that so that I can go ahead and complete my assignment. So over to you, Nigel.
Yeah. So as you can see, I just did a quick response, or you'll see in a sec. Why don't we meet now and do a whiteboard? Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to launch a meet now, given that teams inside of a team might not go the greatest. So bear with us. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and come over to the whiteboard. And actually, Ash, can you stop sharing your screen for 1 sec?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So I've got, in this case, now imagine I walked up to it. All I would have done to the hub is essentially sign into it. And by signing into it once, I've got access to all of my files that are OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, for example. So probably what I would have done in the real life case here is done a meet now directly on the device, adding Kara to it. Sorry. So in this case, I'm going to launch Whiteboard. I'm going to get rid of my presentation there. And right away, in this case, now we've pre-created one, but I could have done this on the fly, is jump right into the Whiteboard app on the hub, which hopefully you can see okay. I know you won't get a lot of detail there. And if I wasn't doing a meet now where I would have shared the whiteboard, I can still come into the whiteboard. Now, we're back into the Microserve tenant here, so you can't see this piece as well. Sorry, what I can do is share this out. You can see that I can add participants into the whiteboard. Now, what's really smart about this, now keeping in context, this is now our Microserve tenant, not the demo tenant, but it's smart enough to know who I'm most likely to need to collaborate with, given meetings, last contact, things like that. So in the demo tenant, what popped up right away was Adele's name. So I would have added her there. In this case, I've got Ash already added. And so Ash, do you want to just tell me what you're struggling with Newton's first law?
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to know more about airspeed, like how do you attain the constant rate? So if you could explain that.
Okay, you bet. Now, again, caveat, I'm no physics professor. but in the scenario I tried to describe this, okay, well, the plane's in constant motion. It's going to keep moving forward. And if it had no drag, we wouldn't need to do anything. It's going to be in that constant state of motion. But given we've got drag, wind and aerodynamics are making that plane slow down, as we can see here, we need to apply thrust. So we're going to use our engines, which is that thrust to move us further forward. And as long as the thrust is stronger than the drag, there you go, we can move forward. Does that help you, Adele?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. So since I've got some help, let me go ahead and submit my assignment. So I'll show you how I would do that. So I would just go back into my assignment. and click on add work. So I have my assignment already in my local system. So all I have to do is just upload it right now. So here you go. And click done. So once I'm done, I would also go ahead and turn in so that my professor, that is Kara, gets a notification on her end. So once I turn in, I would get some fancy image, which just appreciates me for what I'm doing. So I'm done here. So over to you, Nigel.
Awesome. Thanks, Ash. Let me share back out my team experience. So I jump back into the classroom. Here it is. Imagine we're tomorrow. I want to look at the assignments, see how good my class is doing. And I'm going to find that paper that we just created. Uh-oh. Well, first off, 1 out of 25 students just turned it in. Maybe I would jump over to the Teams channel, do an @team. Don't forget about this assignment. In this case, obviously, it's only Adele over there doing the work. So I'm going to jump into that paper, or into the assignment. I'm going to see all the students that didn't turn it in. And there's Adele, she's turned it in. So why don't we have a quick look at her work. And right away, as soon as I do it, I'm in the assignment on the right. I can see the paper that she's created. Impressive, she did that so fast from when she asked for help. She's describing the laws. This looks pretty good to me. Okay, so why don't I think about grading? For the neatness factor, this looks pretty good to me. I can't really complain. Completion, well, she's recorded all 3 laws. Maybe she could have gone into more detail. I'll give her a good on that one. Timeliness, well, wow, she's the only one that submitted it, so I'll give her full credit for that. And this looks pretty accurate. So overall, I think I'm pretty happy with this assignment. And I'm done. Now maybe I want to say, great job, Ash. Keep up the good work, whatever I want to say. And then I'm going to return that assignment. So right away, that assignment's logged. It's now been graded. The history of that is all stored in Teams. I can refer back to her assignment in the work. I can see everybody else's. And to me, the cool part is starting to think about, I really wish that my kids were getting to experience something like this, not only for just making it easier for me as a parent or watching the kids figure out computers for the first time at a young age, but more than that, I could start thinking about that context of just how much more productive we'd be and better set up as we move into more of that modern workforce, where this is going to be a tool that we live in as a part of our jobs in many corporate environments, for example. So I really see a lot of value that could come with that. And hopefully that gives you a taste test of what could come. Now, with that, let me jump quickly back to the slides. Now on the Hub, this is as easy as essentially just hitting the transfer window button. I still have my slides open. I'll get rid of that one here, and I've got my demo up, and I'm going to make it full screen again. So hopefully that was pretty informative for you, and at least gave you a bit of a taste of what this would be like from an education context outside of what we're doing here at Microserve. And to sum it up, what I think is really cool as you start introducing devices like the Hub, is that we take something that we are all comfortable and familiar with in classroom settings. Now, again, this only applies as we get out of virtual classrooms and actually go back to our facilities. But as we do, we take that space where I just walk up and I grab, a whiteboard pen and I start writing with a coworker or student. That simple collab experience. But now I've dovetailed it into a device that I can walk up and use right away in the same experience. But I have all the other power where I can remotely collaborate with a colleague in a different city or country. So all of those tools kind of come up under one device. And the thing I want to highlight here is, I will mention I was a little bit stressed out on the timing, getting the demo, getting a Hub for the first time, getting it deployed and stood up. And why this really struck true for me, I went from a factory reset, I believe it was last Thursday, to doing my very first meeting on the Hub and having it managed by Intune in an hour and a half. So after watching our review team work and deploy different technologies and some of the challenges of making things interoperate and talk together, seeing this come together as that integrated experience so easily was just incredible to realize how easy it could be as we move forward with this type of technology. Well, the last point I wanted to touch on was what I also didn't realize before we got into this, and we're now living in the modern workplace world, is how we meet has also changed. So I talked about the pain points earlier. But when you think about a meeting, it's not just that 1 hour or 45 minutes you're in the meeting for. It's the before, during, and after kind of context. So how do we think of meetings differently than we always had? You know, in the context of Teams, I can open up that meeting invite, and I often do now, and we start the chat before our meeting occurs. Anybody have any other points for the agenda? You know, Ash, what do you want to cover today? Things like that, we can already have done, so we're not wasting our precious hour together to do that. And a response to a chat is so easy and quick, it really helps. Obviously, during the meeting, all the things I've been talking about, from document co-authoring to Whiteboard and sharing in real time, that all takes place. And then even better, after that meeting, my recording of it is stored in my team. It's in the same tool. I don't have to go hunting for where's that meeting recording stored. I need to upload it somewhere. It's already where I need it to be. And then all of that dialogue that can happen after, tracking action items, meeting notes, all gets easier. So to kind of sum it up, I had to quote Satya at Microsoft. His line is one of my favorites I think I've heard. You know, 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. This graph is literally from Microserve's usage data of Teams. And you can absolutely see our spike come March. So all the way back here, you know, that's January, all the way to September, we had adopted Teams and we're actively using it. You can see the adoption and usage more than doubled when March hit. So right away you can see how we were forced into that transformation, and thank goodness we already had that tool set up. So I can't believe it. You know, these stats are literally our meetings over the last 90 days alone and what we've achieved. And on the right, this is actually from a Power BI dashboard that took me less than 10 minutes last week to plug in, to suck all the usage data out of Teams and present me the richest dashboard that I couldn't possibly have created myself, and give me stats like this. So the purple is audio calls, the orange being number of video calls, and the gray is how many content sharing sessions we've had. So if you look at March, well, getting off the ground, we hadn't fully deployed Teams Voice yet. We had nearly 5,000 audio calls, you know, a couple thousand, you know, video calls. This was early days of COVID, and then a bunch of screen shares. You can see we more than doubled that in the following 2 months. So right away, we hit around the 10,000 mark of calls, people actively using and participating in them. A lot of what I see isn't even using telephony, though. It's the one-on-one calls between coworkers, you know, things like that. So I'm a big believer in what this can do, and if you allow it, watching the adoption grow is amazing to see. Now, obviously, just to wrap this before we get into Q&A, we can obviously help you with any of this. So starting with any kind of conversation we really want to have about anything we presented on today, you know, we can hook you up with the right resources, whether it being a hub or a team specialist, to have a dialogue about where you're at in your journey and what we could do to help. Or we could set up things like the Art of the Possible session around Surface and Touch and how that can better enable your organizations. If you're already using Surface, we could also facilitate a Power the Pen session as a thanks for joining the session today. When it comes to projects and implementation type services, we really break this into 4 buckets. We've got sort of the deployment, security, governance buckets. That could be any of the related services that come around to get you into Teams effectively, or it could just be assessing where you're at in your journey of teamwork, what that looks like, and help build your roadmap to how best you could migrate your scenario. We also have education and user adoption. This is where resources like Ash come to play. Potentially creating custom content, assessing your ability to adopt and manage the change that might come with this, and changing your user behaviors. Voice calling and doing what we've done and go all the way into Teams Voice. And lastly, we already had a very mature audiovisual practice that we've now in the recent years really invested around understanding Teams related devices and support and technologies. And honestly, I think it's probably made their lives easier deploying Teams devices, because in our experience, it's often so much easier to deploy. You know, many of you may know of Microserve really around Enduser Compute. That's what we do at the highest volume in pretty much all of Western Canada. And I'm happy to say we've also modernized our approach. We can continue doing the traditional, you know, bringing product in, maintaining and forecasting your inventory and stocking levels and whatnot, and then pre-staging in our tech centers to apply images. But we've also updated that entire process, and we have the teams with the knowledge to help get you there should you want to go down a modern deployment path. But essentially, the process flow still fits in. to manage to make sure you always have adequate stock. You might still be bringing it to the Microserve warehouse. We can then do something called white glove pre-provisioning with Microsoft Autopilot, which essentially gets us better set up to bring that device to ship it to the end user when it's already had a base load of apps and things and policies applied to it, so that the time deploy when it sits on a user's desk for the first time is minimized. And then for any of you that are interested but really don't want to become a Teams expert, then we can go down more of a managed service path as well. Our teams are up to speed on Teams. We've been using it for quite a while, both internally and with many of our managed clients today. So it could be just straight from managing the tenant and Teams-based support, or going down a path, maybe your focus is just on how do we drive change management and adoption. So we can also help work with colleagues like Ash on the line today. And as a part of that, we've made a partnership with a tool that gives an on-demand learning portal for all of Office 365 content. It's called Brainstorm Quick Help, and we leverage that for many of our clients and ourselves internally, such that, you know, in that real time, when I hear from my VP Finance, oh, I need to share this file with our president or with the exec team, and he goes, I'm going to email it to you guys. Can you edit it and send it back to me? I go, hold up, let me send you a link. I actually have it favorited, and I send this one the most. Here's how you share a file in OneDrive. And right away, you know, as we walked into our meeting, 10 of us were sitting there sharing the same spreadsheet, for example. So how do we give you the tools that enable you as a support provider to start going, here's a link. If you watch this 2-minute video, you're going to know exactly what to do and how to do it, for example. And then lastly, you can think of rooms as a managed entity as well. And we could go down that path to help keep your rooms supportable and sustainable using Teams, for example. Obviously, this is but a subset of our broader service portfolio. More than happy to have any conversations to talk to you about anything else that you see in the slide. I'm not going to worry you and go into that detail. And with that, jump straight over to Q&A.
So Nigel, this is Sil here. We've got a couple questions in the chat. I'll start with those as people add their questions to the chat or come live and unmute themselves. Julieta, if you can make sure that the people can unmute themselves. And the first question is from Jeff Wong here. Do you know if Telex can be had FIPA compliant?
Telex is the solution we went with. And honestly, I didn't do all of the technical eval on it. So my caveat would be I want to get a better answer for you with more detail. But we were assured, you know, our data stays in Canada, for example. The call detail reporting, role-based delegation, things like that, make sure that we can, any of the content that we have there, or if we're enabling things like a recording, we can keep it secured and only accessed by the right people. Specifically to FIPA compliancy, that might be a good takeaway that we can do for you.
Okay. And then the other question is actually from Murtaza. It talks about Microsoft CRM integration tools where the information could be ported from the Microsoft platform over to your CRMs.
I think it's a bit of an it depends answer, because obviously it depends on what CRM tool you're leveraging. Right. Many of them are headed to a click to call from a dialing perspective. Yeah, so I guess we need to look at the context more specifically. Now, Microsoft team, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or answers there around CRM tools and some of the ability to actually keep the activity data in a CRM platform.
So this is Greg Milligan. I mean, Teams is its own app dev platform, and so there are certainly lots of opportunities to build connections. I haven't looked. I haven't seen a whole lot within educational context of CRM systems and integration into Teams. But I mean, there's an entire app dev platform. So. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm watching a lot of that growth, like working with our marketing team. We were talking about introducing chat on your website, for example. There are tools that leveraging the third-party integrations that can use the APIs, and I can actually have a website-based chat that comes in through a plugin app in Teams where I'm chatting with customers externally through the portal. So just a bit of an example, different context, but a lot of that is the ecosystem. I think that's really going to take off in the next few years.
Awesome. So at this point, we do not have any more question in the chat. If there's anybody else that would like to ask some questions, you can type them in the chat or get unmute. We had a pretty good attendance today. We had close to 30 people.
Amazing. Well, thanks for everybody's time. As Ken pointed out in the chat, if you haven't seen it, we got a link in the chat there. If you go ahead and fill out that form, you enter for the draw for Surface Go, I believe. So click that link. It'd be great to get some feedback and talk to you soon, hopefully.
Perfect.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Nigel. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Nigel. Thanks, Ash. You guys did a great job.
Awesome. Well, thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye, everyone.